In the bitter cold of 1885, deep within the shadowy heart of the Appalachian Mountains, a story began that still stains the soil of Boone County with silence and shame. Locals called it the Hollow Curse, a tale whispered across generations but buried from official records. The woman at its center was known simply as Agatha Brindle, a widow who lived with her 4 sons in a rotting farmhouse that leaned like a dying animal against the frozen hills. No one in those mountains knew where she had come from. She arrived one winter morning after a snowstorm, leading a mule cart piled high with furniture and covered cages that rattled softly when the wind hit them. Some said she came from Kentucky. Others whispered she'd been run out of Georgia for witchcraft. But in towns like these, people asked few questions, especially when the newcomer offered medicine and midwifery. Her remedies worked, but her eyes carried something that made even desperate men step back. By the spring of 1886, the Brindle house had already become a place no traveler approached after dark. Children spoke of seeing faint lights glowing beneath the house, flickering through cracks in the floorboards. Miners on their way home claimed they heard cries, not animal, not human, carried up through the valley like the wind itself was mourning. Locals noticed that Agatha's sons, Elias, Jonah, Caleb, and little Abram, never seemed to grow older. When they were first seen, the eldest looked perhaps 12. 3 years later, he looked the same. They were pale, thin, and silent, following their mother like shadows. Their clothes were torn but clean. They never played, never spoke to outsiders, and when someone approached their home, they'd vanish behind the curtains like frightened ghosts. It was the postman, Henry Teller, who first raised alarm. He said he'd heard chains dragging across the floor as Agatha came to fetch her letters. When he asked about it, she smiled and told him her boys wander in their sleep. Teller quit that route a week later, saying the woman's laughter followed him all the way down the hollow road. In November of that same year, a heavy storm buried the valley under snow. No one saw Agatha or her sons for nearly 2 months. When spring came, a traveling preacher, Reverend Cole, stopped by the homestead. What he found there began one of the darkest investigations in Appalachian history. The house was silent, windows boarded from inside. The preacher knocked for nearly 10 minutes before Agatha appeared, her face thinner, her hair white despite her youth. She said her sons were resting and refused to let him in. But when Cole stepped away, he heard something faint behind the walls, like someone whispering for help in a language that wasn't quite human. Days later, Sheriff Dugan of Boone County rode out to investigate. The community had begun whispering again, this time not about strange lights, but about missing travelers. A logging worker, a census man, even a neighbor's nephew who'd gone to deliver firewood. The sheriff approached the house at dusk. Smoke rose from the chimney, but no light came from the windows. He knocked. No answer. He entered. The air inside was thick with herbs, mold, and something metallic, blood. In the back of the house, behind a locked cellar door, he found chains. 4 of them, bolted into the floor, and what lay at the end of those chains, he couldn't describe in words for the rest of his life. Before we go deeper into what Sheriff Dugan found in that cellar, take a second. Where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? These mountains may be distant, but the darkness in this story feels like it's still breathing. If you're drawn to uncovering history's most disturbing secrets, make sure you subscribe, because what happens next in the Brindle Cellar is something no human mind was meant to witness. When Sheriff Dugan pried open the cellar door of the Brindle house, a gust of foul, cold air struck his face, thick with the stench of rot, herbs, and something older, something wrong. He lifted his lantern, and its trembling light fell across what looked like the inside of a slaughterhouse built by a lunatic. Chains clinked. The sheriff froze. In the corner, 4 figures crouched in the dirt. They were the Brindle boys, or what was left of them. Naked, pale as candle wax, with long, matted hair and eyes that reflected the lantern light like an animal's. Their wrists were raw from iron cuffs. Their mouths, trembling and dry, twitched at the sight of the intruder. One hissed. Another began muttering in a language the sheriff couldn't understand, and then from behind them came a voice. Soft, sweet, motherly. You shouldn't have come here, Sheriff. They're not ready yet. Agatha stood at the bottom of the steps, holding something in her hands, a bowl carved from bone, filled with thick, dark liquid that smelled like decay. The sheriff drew his gun, shouting for her to stand down, but she only smiled, whispering, "They need to eat." In that instant, one of the boys, the youngest, Abram, lunged forward, his teeth snapping inches from Dugan's boot. The sheriff fired once. The sound echoed like thunder through the hollow, but the shot didn't kill the boy. It only made the others scream high and shrill, like the cry of something ancient. Agatha shrieked and rushed to them, covering their heads with her shawl. Chanting words Dugan swore no human throat should be able to form. When the sheriff retreated to call for help, he looked back and saw something that haunted him until his dying breath. The boys were crawling toward their mother, but their limbs bent the wrong way. Their bodies looked stretched, distorted, as though human shape was only a memory they were struggling to remember. That night, the sheriff gathered 5 men from town, a doctor, a deputy, and 3 locals brave enough or foolish enough to follow him. They rode through the hollow under a blood-red moon, the kind that always makes the mountains feel alive. When they reached the Brindle house, no smoke rose from the chimney. The door stood open. Inside, everything was gone. Furniture, herbs, bones, even the chains. The cellar was empty, except for claw marks carved deep into the dirt floor, spiraling toward the center where a single candle still burned. On the wall, written in soot and blood, were 5 words. They were never just mine. The doctor examined the marks and said they weren't made by metal or tools. These, he whispered, were made by hands. The sheriff ordered a search party to sweep the valley. For 3 days they combed through the forest and caves, but there was no sign of Agatha or her sons. Only strange things left behind, piles of bones arranged in circles, dolls made of straw and hair, and torn scraps of children's clothing hanging from trees. On the 4th night, the deputy claimed he heard singing echoing through the canyon. A woman's voice, soft and broken, followed by 4 smaller voices humming in harmony. The sound drifted through the cold air and vanished like fog. The men abandoned the search the next morning. Months passed. The Brindle house collapsed under its own rot. New settlers avoided the hollow, but travelers began disappearing again along the same road that led past the ruins. Those who survived to tell said they saw a woman walking barefoot in the snow, holding a lantern, calling softly into the darkness. Elias. Jonah, come home now. Locals believed she never left those mountains, that she was still searching, still feeding, still trying to keep her sons alive. Before I tell you what Sheriff Dugan finally discovered a year later, something so disturbing the county sealed the records for 50 years, let me ask you this. What time is it where you're watching this from? Because wherever you are, the night feels longer when you know there are mothers like Agatha, still calling their children home. By spring of 1886, the Black Hollow woods were whispering again. Hunters spoke of strange cries at dusk, not quite animal, not quite human, echoing between the birch trees. The sheriff who'd led the search, Thomas Dugan, hadn't slept properly in months. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 4 pale figures crawling toward their mother, their faces twisted in worship and hunger. Then one morning, a trapper named Eli McGraw stumbled into town half frozen, claiming he'd found something buried in the snow near the ruins of the Brindle house. In his hands was a small wooden idol, carved crudely in the shape of a woman holding 4 children close against her chest. Their faces were gone, burned away. Eli swore he'd heard whispering as he dug it up, words that weren't his own. Sheriff Dugan and Dr. Everett rode out with him that afternoon. When they reached the hollow, they found new footprints, bare, large, and uneven, circling the remains of the house. The snow around the cellar was melted in perfect rings, as if something warm had been moving beneath the ground. They pried open the trapdoor again. Inside was not a cellar anymore. It was a tunnel, a narrow, black shaft, descending into the earth, lined with carved bones, each etched with what looked like writing, crude scripture scratched into ivory. The mother provides. The blood is light. The family endures. The air grew heavy the deeper they went. At the bottom of the tunnel lay a chamber lit by hundreds of candles, their wax dripping over old skulls. And in the center stood an altar. Upon it lay bones arranged neatly. 4 human skeletons, each bound by chain, heads bowed toward the 5th skeleton at the head of the altar, smaller, female, missing its jaw. Dr. Everett froze. "That's her," he whispered. "That's Temperance Blackthorn, or what's left of her." Sheriff Dugan lifted one of the skulls and noticed deep claw marks across the bone from the inside. Then came a sound from the darkness behind them, soft, wet breathing. The sheriff turned, lantern shaking. In the far corner something moved. A figure, enormous, hunched, its skin pale and slick like candle wax. It crawled forward, dragging something heavy behind it. The light fell upon its face, and Dugan's mind broke in 2. It was one of the sons, but his features were wrong. His jaw too wide, his eyes clouded white. His chest split with scars, like something had been sewn and unsewn over and over. He moved closer, muttering words that sounded like prayer. Mother said not to wake the rest. Dugan fired twice, the sound cracking through the chamber. The creature collapsed, twitching, whispering as it died. "She's waiting for you upstairs." But upstairs was only silence, until they reached the ruins of the cabin and saw, on the wall above the hearth, fresh writing carved into the wood. "We are all her sons now. The sheriff ordered the tunnel sealed that same night. Dynamite collapsed the passage, burying the chamber beneath tons of earth. But those who lived in Morgan County said the ground never settled right. Even years later, travelers claimed they could hear faint knocking from below the soil on quiet nights. Slow, steady, like something still alive was trying to crawl its way back up. Sheriff Dugan resigned 2 months later. He left Tennessee without a word, abandoning his badge and his home. But his last letter, found years after his death, ended with a line that chilled historians and believers alike. "I sealed the tunnel, but I still hear her calling. And sometimes, when the wind comes down from Frozen Head Mountain, I swear I hear 4 voices answering back. Tell me, if you were in his place, would you have sealed it? Or tried to save what was left of them?" In 1937, half a century after Sheriff Dugan sealed the Brindle Cellar, the Tennessee Historical Society sent a small team of state investigators into the valley. The plan was simple: to document surviving Appalachian folklore before it disappeared. But one member, Dr. Irene Calloway, had another motive. She'd grown up on the edges of Boone County, and her grandmother used to whisper about the mother beneath the mountain. Irene wanted proof that the story wasn't just another fireside legend. When she arrived, The locals warned her not to stay past sundown. The ground breathes, they said, and when it exhales, you'll hear chains. She laughed at first, until her lantern began flickering before she'd even reached the old Brindle property. Frozen Head Mountain loomed overhead, its ridges still as sharp as when lightning struck it in 1885. The remains of the cabin were gone, but the land itself felt wrong, uneven, as if something below had shifted. The soil near the old cellar was warm despite the mountain air. Irene set up her equipment, taking soil samples and photographs. She didn't believe in curses, but science, she said later in her notes, has no word for the kind of silence that pressed against her that day. By dusk, her assistant, Samuel Reed, had uncovered what looked like an iron ring embedded in the earth, the same kind once used for securing livestock. But this ring was attached to something buried deep below. They dug for nearly an hour before the spade struck wood. It was a door, and carved across it in perfectly preserved letters, "The family sleeps but does not die. They should have stopped." Irene even wrote in her field log, "The air feels heavier, like breathing through damp wool. Something is alive down there," but curiosity won. They pried the door open. The smell hit them first, rot mixed with sweetness. The ladder leading down was slick with moisture, as if condensation rose from something breathing below. They descended. The tunnel hadn't collapsed completely as Sheriff Dugan believed. A narrow path led deeper, where the stone walls were covered in symbols that looked older than English, older than Christianity itself. Words carved over and over, "The blood remembers." At the tunnel's end, the candles were still there, or rather, what was left of them, melted stubs surrounding an altar of fused bone and ash. But what made Irene drop her lantern wasn't the altar. It was the sound. From somewhere below the floor came the faint, rhythmic clinking of chains. Samuel shouted, thinking maybe there was someone trapped. He began pulling at the loose stones of the floor, ignoring Irene's cries to stop. As the rocks gave way, he gasped and fell backward. Beneath the stones was a pit, shallow but deep enough to hold something curled inside it. It was a body, or what had once been one. The flesh was mummified, the mouth sewn shut with twine. Across its chest, carved deep into the dried skin, were the words, "Mother keeps us close." Before Irene could speak, the chains rattled again, this time louder, closer, rising from the darkness. Then came a voice, soft female, Ezekiel, "Caleb, come home." The lantern shattered as it hit the floor. In the brief flare of light, Irene swore she saw movement beyond the altar, 4 shapes standing in the shadows, eyes reflecting the dim glow like animals. They ran. She never stopped until she saw daylight again. Her report to the state was sealed under mythological and cultural superstitions. Case Reform 12B. But her personal diary, the one found after her death in 1952, told the truth she couldn't share publicly. "We thought we'd uncovered remains of a forgotten crime. What we found was something still waiting. I believe the Brindle bloodline never died. It simply went back underground. To this day, hikers near the base of Frozen Head Mountain claim to hear faint singing at night, a woman's voice humming what sounds like a lullaby, answered by 4 deeper tones. So tell me, if you were standing at that hollow tonight, with the ground still warm beneath your feet, would you listen to the song, or run before it finishes?" In 1972, nearly 90 years after the first discovery, the U.S. Geological Survey sent a team into the Black Hollow region to study strange seismic readings under Frozen Head Mountain. The instruments showed something impossible: movement underground, rhythmic and deliberate like a heartbeat. The epicenter matched the exact location of the Brindle homestead. Among the team was a young field technician named Mark Hanley. He'd grown up hearing whispers of the mother beneath, the ghost that chained her sons in the dark. He didn't believe in curses, but when his supervisor ordered him to drill at the old site, Mark hesitated. The air around the hollow was unnaturally still. Not even the insects stirred. The drill descended 80 feet before it struck something soft, not stone, not soil. The equipment jammed. Seconds later, the ground shuddered, and a deep, hollow moan rose from below. Everyone froze. Then the soil around the borehole began to crack, releasing a breath of warm, fetid air that smelled like decay. They backed away, but the tremor grew louder. The earth pulsed again. Once, twice, and then split. A hole opened wide enough to swallow the rig. Inside was blackness so deep their flashlights couldn't find the bottom. Mark swore he saw shapes moving in the dark. 4, maybe 5, shifting just beyond the edge of light. One of them whispered his name. The team fled. The report never reached Washington. The government classified the site as unstable terrain, sealing it under layers of concrete and barbed wire. Officially, the Brindle Hollow doesn't exist anymore, but locals say otherwise. They say that after every heavy rain, the earth there still bleeds red water that smells faintly of milk and iron. And every so often, when the fog rolls down from Frozen Head, people see shadows in the mist, tall, thin figures walking in a line, led by a smaller one that hums softly. A lullaby no one remembers learning, but everyone feels they once knew. The legend of Temperance Blackthorn didn't die with her sons. It spread. Some say every decade, another family in those mountains vanishes. 4 boys and a mother. Always 4. Always a mother. In 1999, a hiker named Daniel Cross disappeared near the old property. When searchers found his camera weeks later, it contained only 3 photos: a fog-covered valley, a crude wooden idol shaped like a woman with 4 children, and a final shot, blurry, but clear enough to make out 5 pale faces staring through the trees. Forensic analysis showed the image wasn't taken by him. No one goes near that valley anymore. The state sealed it again in 2003, renaming the area Red Hollow Preserve. But the soil there still breathes, literally. Thermal drones show patches of ground that rise and fall, as if something alive lies just beneath the surface. Maybe it's the earth settling. Maybe it's memory. Or maybe it's a mother still waiting for her sons to come home. And if you ever find yourself driving through Morgan County late at night, roll down your window. Listen carefully. Some say you can hear a woman's voice, faint and distant, whispering from the trees. The family endures. The blood remembers. The cellar is never empty, so tell me something. What time is it where you are right now? And if you're listening from a quiet place, maybe alone, maybe somewhere far from town, just make sure the ground beneath your feet isn't moving, because the Appalachian mother still calls her children home. And tonight, she might have learned your name.